Welcome everyone. My name is David Schmid. I am analyst of journal publishing at the journal publishing branch of AKJournals, and I will be the moderator for this roundtable discussion organized for Peer Review Week 2022 by AKJournals. I am joined by two editors-in-chief at AKJournals, namely Helga Dorner and Anikó Fehérvári. Helga and Anikó, once again, thank you very much for accepting our invitation. Before we start the discussion, let me introduce you to our listeners by reading out your short biographies in alphabetical order, if that's okay with you. Helga Dorner is the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Adult Learning, Knowledge and Innovation, an international journal related to adult learning and knowledge construction, founded in 2016. She obtained her PhD and her habilitation degree in educational sciences. At present, she is an associate professor and the director of the Institute of Research on Adult Education and Knowledge Management at the Faculty of Education and Psychology at Eötvös Loránd University in Budapest, Hungary. Previously, she was a lecturer and a principal investigator at Central European University in Budapest, Hungary. Throughout her scientific career, she has accumulated extensive experience as a researcher. She has been involved in numerous international research projects and published over 30 journal articles and 10 book chapters. Now, let me introduce our next participant. Anikó Fehérvári is the editor-in-chief of Edukáció, an interdisciplinary Hungarian language journal devoted to the social aspects of education and founded in 1991, as well as the editor-in-chief of the Hungarian Educational Research Journal, an international journal focusing on contemporary ideas and themes in educational research, established in 2011. She obtained her PhD in sociology and her habilitation degree in educational sciences. She is a full professor and a director of the Institute of Education at the Faculty of Education and Psychology at Eötvös Loránd University in Budapest, Hungary. She is primarily recognized for her tertiary teaching and course development activities, as well as her scientific work on social and educational inequalities and educational effectiveness. Her research output includes 16 monographs, more than 20 edited books, and 70 journal articles. Helga and Anikó, do you find these introductions correct? Is there anything else you wish to add, perhaps?
No.
Great. Thank you. So we are here for Peer Review Week, which, to use the organizer's definition from peerreviewweek.wordpress.com, is, quote, a community-led, yearly, global virtual event celebrating the essential role that peer review plays in maintaining research quality. The event brings together individuals, institutions, and organizations committed to sharing the central message that quality peer review, in whatever shape or form it may take, is critical to scholarly communication, unquote. Each year, the focus is on a different topic. This year's theme is research integrity, which was selected via an open global poll receiving over 1,200 responses in order to, quote, highlight the ways in which peer review contributes to and reinforces trust in scholarship, unquote. Having said this, I suggest we begin the discussion. To start off, we have put together a list of some general questions pertaining to the topic at hand. Let's see. First, how would you define research integrity? Or in other words, what do you consider the most important ingredients of research integrity?
Okay, in 2017, the All European Academies formulated and adopted the European Code of Conduct for Research Integrity, which serves as a framework for the European research community across all disciplines and research context. This document sets out four principles. First, reliability. That means in ensuring the quality of research reflected in the design, the methodology, the analysis, and the use of resources. Second, honesty. Honesty in developing, undertaking, reviewing, reporting, and communicating research in a transparent, fair, full, and unbiased way. Third, respect for colleagues, research participants, society, ecosystems, cultural heritage, and environment. And fourth, accountability. That means for the research from idea to publication, for its management and organization, for training, supervision, and mentoring, and for its wider impact. These are principles that we follow, and they also reflected in the principles of academic and university world in Hungary.
Just to add to what Aniko has just said, of course, we too, in our journal, keep to these standards of the European Code. But I personally have been trained in a different framework years back, and it's called the Tri-Council Policy Statement, which is basically the ethical conduct for research involving humans as prescribed by the Canadian Institute of Health Research, Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada, and the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. And of course, it's not a surprise that they have similar underpinning principles and values, such as respect for persons, concern for welfare, as well as justice.
Thank you. In your opinion, what role do peer review processes have in promoting research integrity?
As I already mentioned, the principles refer to communication and publication too. The European Code also sets out some principles for peer review processes. It declares that researchers take seriously their commitment to the research community by participating in referring, reviewing, and evaluation. Furthermore, reviewers or editors with a conflict of interest withdraw from involvement in decisions in publication, funding, appointment, promotion, or reward. In addition, reviewers maintain confidentiality unless there is a prior approval for disclosure. Reviewers and editors respect the rights of authors.
I too believe that peer review is an important means to build and maintain trust in research and in researchers in general. And you mentioned building trust in your introduction as well, so that's why I'm referring back to it. This basically means that it allows others to have confidence in the methods, the findings, and their interpretation as presented and published in peer-reviewed journals. So processes, therefore, should ensure upholding the highest standards of rigor in applying the appropriate ethical, legal, and professional frameworks, as well as the use of transparent and fair processes to deal with allegations in research misconduct.
Why do you think it's important to talk about the role of research integrity in peer review and beyond it these days?
The number of scientist publications and articles has multiplied in recent decades. Furthermore, the growing pressure on academic to publish, the publish or perish culture, is leading to an increase in research misconduct and other unacceptable practices, for instance, fabrication or falsification, or the most unacceptable practice, plagiarism.
I actually agree with what Aniko has just mentioned, and I would also consider these the most problematic issues. And I would also add, again, coming back to the word trust. So peer review is about building trust, and it's about building trust among researchers as well. So those of us involved in this job have to maintain the highest possible standards of quality and ethics. But it is also important to build trust, so to say, the public's, the taxpayers' trust while we do research. So research integrity in peer review as well must be upheld to avoid mistakes and misconduct and be kept free from outside influences.
Moving on to the next part, now I would like to ask some specific questions which relate to your common area of research, namely educational sciences. Let's see. Previously, I read that both of you are active researchers and have extensive experience in publishing your research, right? So now I would like you to talk about what you do as an educational researcher to ensure research integrity in your work. My first question related to this topic is, do you read scientific literature that has not been peer-reviewed? What advantages and disadvantages do these have compared to peer review articles? And is it always easy to make judgments about their integrity?
Yes, I read material that has not been peer reviewed, for example, research reports. But I would rather say that when I publish, I make sure that I only cite publication whose results I consider robust. I think that what journals expect from authors. On the other hand, educational research is a social science, so we should know that as social scientists we cannot establish regularities. We can only say probabilities. So and educational research is very much depend on the social and cultural context in which it takes place. I think the integrity of research can be ensured if it takes place in collaboration and research groups, which ensures its openness. Of course, sharing results and data further increases integrity, as well as the usefulness and usability of research. In education research, there is a lot of evaluation and impact assessment of educational programs. Sharing these results not only increases the integrity of research, but also has a social utility.
In agreement with your ideas, of course, whenever we publish, we turn to journals and research that is published in journals and outlets that are robust enough and trustworthy and trusted resources, basically, and which follow the highest academic and ethical standards. Nevertheless, I do read resources and papers, if you will, that have not been peer reviewed. For instance, I'm very much interested in how research results trickle down or not in popular publications. What do I mean by that? Basically, how science is communicated in genres and outlets other than scholarly publications. And this interest, and my interest in this question, relates to the responsibility of knowledge production and knowledge sharing in and, importantly, beyond academia. In particular, how well we are doing with science communication in order to make knowledge trustworthy for and accessible to the public. But I think this resonates very much with what you have just said.
Thank you. Our next question related to your roles as an educational researcher is, have you encountered any challenges with editors or reviewers during peer review? And if so, did you manage to overcome those challenges?
In our journal, we have seen several clear cases of articles being rejected. These were simple bad articles. There were one of two cases that were not clear-cut, but it was more a cases of for having already published something that overlapped with the submitted articles. So originality had to be established.
So coming back to the challenges, right, with editors and reviewers, I mentioned that I completed an accredited online training in research ethics. And to be honest, that made me also think about my role and responsibility as a researcher. And of course, I reflected on my own researcher bias, which is important. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that we are not born good or excellent reviewers. And it takes formal training, mentoring, collaboration, and a lot of rejected submissions to understand what is helpful and unhelpful and where the boundaries are in terms of ethical research conduct. So, I would definitely encourage editors and reviewers to also do formal trainings to learn about good practices and join informal groups or discussions with colleagues with similar interests, duties, and responsibilities.
From your introductions, we also saw that both of you occupy prestigious positions in the academia, meaning that both of you work as a university professor and an institutional director. So, as a university professor and a supervisor of theses, do you have any good practices how to make research integrity students' top priority?
Yeah, I've been teaching research methodology for over a decade, keeping track of the literature on it. I always tell students to first look at the part about the research data and methods in research articles, whether there is a research question, if it is a quantitative research, what is the sample, if qualitative, for example, is there a protocol of processing and coding interview transcript. For these, you can judge how the results of a publication should be considered, which are robust results and which are not. Yeah.
Yes, I also teach courses and courses on research methods as well, but also subject-specific courses. And research ethics and ethical conduct are two themes, basically, which overarch the courses. And we talk about these principles from day one. And in student writings, because most of my courses are writing-intensive courses, we practice proper academic writing and proper academic conduct and check for plagiarism. And one strategy that I have been using very often is that I bring in the university's policy and actually show that to the students, and I make them read the sections on misconduct eventually. And I also bring in other examples from other institutions and bring in mistakes. And we talk about those issues. And throughout the years, I've found good resources, online trainings on research ethics. So I tend to go back to those resources and I ask the students to do those exercises with me and we reflect upon those. So these should work. But I realize that you have to go back to these issues from time to time. So it's not a one-shot thing, but it's learning on the go.
Okay, and now turning to your roles at AKJournals. Just to reiterate, Helga is the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Adult Learning, Knowledge and Innovation, and Aniko is editor-in-chief of both Educatio and the Hungarian Educational Research Journal. So next set of questions is about how your work as editor-in-chief support research integrity in scholarship. And the first question here is, what arrangements has your journal made to ensure the integrity of the published research? Are you planning to introduce further requirements or recommendations?
Okay, the author guide of HERS include an ethical statement making it explicit that all submissions must be based on research that had been conducted in accordance with the Declaration of Helsinki and according to applicable local and international standards. Authors are expected to be aware of and follow the ethical guide of publisher AKJournals and must conform to be the highest standard of ethical conduct regarding the submission of accurate data, acknowledging the work of others, and developing potential conflict of interest. Authors make an ethics declaration with this content when submitting their manuscript. All submissions are automatically subject to plagiarism check, and manuscript might be rejected without any further consideration of if they contain unsigned word-by-word quotations from previous research. The article template of HASH requires the usual research article structure with separate sections on the research questions and methods, and during the review process we put much emphasis on ensuring that the description of methods is exhaustive, including the description of the limitation. We are now considering the invitation of a specific methodology peer reviewer as well. Yes.
So as our journal, the abbreviation is JOLKI. So JOLKI is, of course, so we use the same guidelines practically because our journal too belongs to the same journal group. So our publisher is AKJournals. But in terms of our specific practices, manuscripts that are identified as problematic, for instance, contain plagiarized content or inappropriate use of citations, referencing, will be automatically rejected. So that's also a practice we have in place. Nevertheless, we are currently reviewing our protocols and plan to introduce the request that authors add explicit reference to the IRB, which is the Institutional Review Board decisions. In our universities called the Ethical Review or Ethical Research Committee. So any similar board's decision in their articles.
How does peer review help to filter out submissions with potential integrity problems? What questions are the reviewers of your journal asked about when it comes to the integrity of the reviewed research? And closely related to this set of questions, are you planning to extend the list of questions?
Reviewers at HASH are asked to first complete a form with questions about objective relevance, theoretical background, methodology, interpretation, overall quality, and scientific originality, structures as well as references of article. They must assess the manuscript if it meets the specified requirements on a scale of 1 to 3. After that, they can write a more in-depth review or comment directly in the manuscript file. Regarding research methodology, the form asks if the paper applies sound and solid methodology for analysis, research, producer and data are clearly described and they are appropriate for the purpose of the paper. As for the interpretation of the result, the requirement is that the conclusion must be clear and logically follow from the text, and the interpretation of the results must be convincing. We have now prepared also a more detailed guide for reviewers that we will share with them during the peer review process.
We too use similar criteria when we ask the reviewers to do their review of the papers, such as the importance and novelty, originalness or originality of the paper or the work submitted, employed methods and analyses, quality of language, as well as referencing. However, we also think that the reviewers are the key players in mitigating the risks of any integrity problems, which means in practice that we very much rely on the expertise of a smaller group of trusted reviewers who have been involved in disseminating research, both as reviewers as well as authors.
How satisfactory are the peer reviews you receive regarding integrity questions? Based on your experience, do the referees pay enough attention to such issues?
We did not have any issues with the quality of peer reviewers. We got so far, but the reason for this might be that we choose reviewers from among researchers we personally know or from among those recommended by them. Since the online review form has explicit questions about methodology, reviewers usually comment on it if they notice any problems in this regards with the manuscript.
So as mentioned, reviewer invitation and selection are the first steps in maintaining integrity and the quality of peer review. And I also, again, just reinforce this notion that we are trying to introduce this, request, I would say, towards the reviewers to insist on the IRB decisions. So in practice, that would mean that the reviewers have to check for the reference to the ethical board decisions in the manuscripts. And if they do not find reference to that, then they indicate this in their review as well. And then in that case, the editor-in-chief can go after that and make sure that there is information on this.
Okay, how do you control the integrity of the peer review itself? Do you have established tools to detect any kind of bias or abuse on the reviewer's part?
We pay attention to avoid any conflict of interest, that the reviewer is from the same research team or co-authors. But to be honest, our biggest problem is rather to find reviewers. I mean, in many cases, exactly because we don't not invite total strangers to do the reviewers, so to speak. At Hajj, we currently apply a double-blinded review process. This is not, however, a problem is as we try to select reviewers who are distant from the author, both professionally and geographically. The current trend at many international professional journals is that they publish the identity of reviewers and their reviewers and their reviews, as well as this increases openness and helps to prevent bias. Transparency serves to ensure research integrity.
I totally agree with this comment on difficulty of finding reviewers.
Yeah.
But also, like, coming back to the question itself, like I find this a very tricky question because as editor-in-chief, I think we have to just have the trust in our reviewers who we invite. And of course, we must respect their expertise and academic conduct. Nevertheless, I am, I'm happy to repeat again what I've said, that the work, with reviewers, like we work with reviewers who have developed expertise in publishing in and reviewing for international peer-reviewed journals. And I truly hope and believe that those colleagues with whom we work understand the importance and the established practices of maintaining research integrity.
What challenges have you encountered with authors during peer review?
Mostly it was about poor methodology, or the methodology applied was not described in sufficient detail, and sometimes it requires several rounds of revision to get the expected quality. In other cases, the similarity index of the manuscript was too high. Sometimes the authors do not cite and reference their own previous research properly.
I agree with what Aniko has just mentioned. I may bring in another, an additional perspective to this. What I figured again throughout the years is that it's really difficult to use a very specific language to describe what is required by the reviewer. So, in other words, reviewers too have to learn how to give proper advice to the authors in order to make the manuscript more robust. So, it's not just identifying the problems, but finding the right language. And here I do not mean grammatically right language, but a constructive critical comments in a structured way to help the authors rewrite and rework. And this is a skill, I'm repeating again myself, and we all have to learn this, both as authors and reviewers.
How could these challenges that you encounter with authors be overcome?
In such cases, we request revision, or in rare cases when we deem the methodology is unjustified, we decline the submission.
In addition to this, I would say guidelines, like good guidelines, are very helpful. And I also tend to give feedback as editor-in-chief to the reviewers. If I find something, challenging or problematic or not helpful, then I tend to give feedback.
What challenges have you encountered with reviewers during peer review?
As I already mentioned, our biggest problem is to find a reviewer in a short time. Sometimes it takes long before the reviewers respond to the invitation at all. And in a few cases, the peer reviews were not thorough or concrete enough. Yes.
Just to add to that, basically, I think academic service in general is a huge issue because I believe that it's underrated as is teaching in academia. So identifying reviewers who are willing to do this service is a constraint for JALKI as well. And I personally think that this is a systemic issue, and like how service to the community is or supposed to be or should be or must be appreciated and acknowledged. And it's a very simple gesture, basically, that I always use in the system, which is that I thank the reviewers. So I click on the button and send a thank you note. And of course, acknowledging their services in publons, or publons, however you pronounce it. We Hungarians who tend to use publons, is an important additional step.
How could these challenges that you encounter with reviewers be overcome?
In the latter case, we usually invite an additional reviewer.
Having discussed our topic from the perspective of your roles as a researcher, university professor, and journal editor-in-chief, now let's take a broader perspective. The next set of questions relates to what perceptions non-academic audiences in Hungary have of educational research in terms of research integrity and trust, in your opinion. The first question related to this topic is, How would you compare these perceptions to those of non-academic audiences elsewhere?
I'm a little bit pessimistic. I think in Hungary we still lack the resources and the platform that can convey research results to the public. The so-called brokering of science is still very, very poor. Therefore, it's very difficult to assess the perceptions of non-academic audience about research integrity and trust. That and also the increase of distrust towards science in general, the prevalence of pseudoscientific news and impressions, the taking of post-truth opinions as facts is a general phenomenon everywhere, not just in Hungary. In education research, it might be even more acute because education is like football. Everyone thinks he is an expert in it. Everyone has an opinion about it, which is not based on scientific facts. Consider the infamous recent research report about the overrepresentedness of women in higher education by the Hungarian State Audit Office.
Well, I'm not sure I can make overall comments about non-academic audiences in Hungary or elsewhere, for that matter. But I too follow these conversations about the so-called fake news and how this narrative, so the narrative of fake news, is being used in social media and beyond. And surely I too sense the distrust in science and research in general. However, I also think that perhaps researchers in science and in research in general, funding organizations and academic institutions need to invest more in science communication. That is, identify and support initiatives that may increase the visibility of research outputs in ways that are accessible to and comprehensible for non-expert audiences. And if you allow me, let me bring an example from our institute, the Institute of Research on Adult Education and Knowledge Management at the Faculty of Education and Psychology at ELTE. That we nurture this idea of reaching out to non-expert audiences through, for example, our third age university programs. And I know that that Anikos Institute is also involved in organizing programs on the European Researchers' Nights, the series of Kutatók éjszakája.
How can peer review help to improve the perceptions of general audiences? Based on your impression, are laymen familiar with the practice of peer review, more or less in Hungary than elsewhere?
I think the non-academic audience is hardly aware of the peer review process, but maybe it is not different elsewhere either.
Well, I am also a bit hesitant to respond to this question because I'm really not sure whether they comprehend the process or are aware. I mean, I'm sure they would comprehend. It's just that they are not necessarily aware of the processes that we use in academia. But I would rather say that maybe this issues related to the issues just mentioned, that the actors or the stakeholders involved in these processes should take more responsibility in establishing ties with the wider ecosystem of education, which is the society around us.
Finally, as the open science movement continues gaining ground worldwide in scholarly publishing, it might be worth considering it from the perspective of today's topic as well. In your opinion, how has the current movement toward open science changed the roles of research integrity and trust in peer review processes in your field, which is educational sciences?
I think this movement is only now beginning to take momentum in educational research at ELTE, and it's our faculty who is the pioneer and and so to speak, leader of this movement, but it's rather because of the psychology department. I think the sharing of results, data, and prior registration all may significantly contribute to increase research integrity. But since this has just begun in my field in education research, so far I cannot say I have experienced major changes.
So if you allow me to get a little bit more personal, in the sense that I share my personal experience as a response to this question. So I'm not an expert in open science at all, but I have been involved in international collaborations, basically from my very early PhD years. That means now you can calculate how old I am. More than or approximately 20 years of practice we are talking about. And throughout these years, I've really had the privilege to work with experts in the field who really understood and put into practice the principles of open science. Of course, at that time, we did not call it open science, but we shared basically our resources, the publications, even databases in these smaller, larger scholarly networks and research collaborations. So sharing knowledge and providing access have always been appreciated, and especially by those of us, and here I'm pointing at myself, I'm telling this to the audience who is going to be listening to this podcast, by those of us who had meager opportunities, and open science and the practices. We have to understand these practices, and we have to learn it on the go to some extent as well.
Thank you very much for your answers. This brings us to the end of this roundtable discussion. Before we wrap up, let me ask, is there anything else that has been left out from our discussion that you think is worth talking about when it comes to research integrity and peer review?
I think we have exhausted the topic of research integrity, but we did that with pleasure.
Great. I feel the same way. Once again, on behalf of AKJournals, I would like to thank both of you for participating in this event. Your answers have been really informative. It was really interesting for me to learn about research integrity and trust by focusing on one specific research domain, educational sciences, and I truly hope that our listeners will benefit from this discussion as well. This has been Dávid Schmid, joined by Editors-in-Chief Helga Dorner and Anikó Fehérvári for Peer Review Week 2022.